Good day, and thank you for taking time from I'm sure what are busy schedules to join us for another edition of webinars that we're providing from IISE, Institute of Industrial and Systems Engineers. I think this is our 125th webinar we've done in the last 4 years, so we've been busy producing these and delivering them for our customers and members of IISE. Today, I'm joined by Jared Frederici, who's a Master Black Belt and a Senior Leader at the Poirier Group, which is headquartered in Toronto, Canada. And he is going to focus on a topic that I think is of broad interest across many industries today as we encounter increasingly difficult economic headwinds. And so the interest in how to be more innovative and creative at finding ways to reduce costs and waste is very important. And I think Jared has some very interesting points of view and perspectives to provide to you today. So the agenda looks like this. I'm going to do a quick tee up. I guess we're in full golf season, so tee up is maybe the appropriate word versus kickoff. And Jared's going to talk with you, share with you his thoughts for about 30 minutes. And then I'll be watching the chat functionality. So you can use webinar chat and you can share comments or observations or questions, and I'll weave those into that 15-minute period where I'll be dialoguing with Jared about some of his points of view and perspectives. And then we'll close out and I'll talk a little bit about what's just ahead with webinars. And then I want to share a little bit about the IISE annual conference, which is coming up in May. So some housekeeping. The SAFE will be sharing links for you to use to access recordings and the PowerPoint presentation. They'll be in different formats and different sites, and he'll be feeding you those links. And those links are also in the presentation. You will also receive follow-up email tomorrow at right around 11 a.m. Eastern, and the links will be posted in that follow-up. Thank you for attending memo. Those of you that are interested in certificates of participation, I email those out 3 to 5 days after the webinar. So be patient. Make sure you check your clutter and spam folders if you don't find yourself getting one and you participate. I mentioned that we've done something in the neighborhood of 125 webinars. Those are posted on demand on the IISE website. Again, SAFE will provide that link for you. This particular webinar will be in the operational and business process excellence folder. So if you go to the IISE website, go to training webinars and then performance excellence webinars, you'll be able to find today's webinar and presentation. I'm going to pass the baton now to Jared and let him introduce himself, and then let him share his perspectives and points of view on cost and waste reduction. Jared?
Thanks, Scott, and thanks everybody for joining today on a Tuesday. I know everybody's busy working on helping organizations take costs out and be more competitive, but we'll spend a little bit of time and I'll just provide a perspective and some things that we're seeing in the organizations we serve and support, and have a bit of fun. There's quite a bit of content in here today. I'm going to burst through some things, but we'll spend, I know we've got about 15 minutes for some Q&A at the end. Then we'll go through all the details of my background. Many of you who have joined these have gotten a chance to hear from me previously, maybe on the supply chain webinar. But yeah, I've been with the Poirier Group for almost 12 years now, doing consulting. We've had, I guess, about 400 projects that we've done across a lot of different industry verticals, probably 20 different industries, some niche, some broad or bigger. We got some time in operations, supporting organizations there. Again, industrial systems engineer out of Ohio State, and been active in IISE, and really love the organization and what it's done for my career and network, and really appreciate the organization. But thanks for having me and for listening to my take on things. And we'll just go ahead and jump right in. TPG Poirier Group is a firm here based in Toronto. We've got almost 50 people now, and we've got US operations, international operations, and won some awards. So the team's doing a great job up here, and we're really proud to be a part of it. I think today what we're going to talk about is just the state of what we're seeing right now in the world, and what we're seeing within organizations, and what the implications are for how we systematically address waste and cost reduction, as it's salient and top of mind for many organizations. Who better equipped from a skill set perspective than us to do that and lead the charge? Our ability to pull these levers fast is critical. We've got to find real, balance sheet impact. We've got to prove it these days to get funding, to get CapEx, to, show private equity we're making strides, to show our VC funds, to show our shareholders. It's real, it's tangible now. In terms of where the levers are at, they tend to be associated with lots of activity, but low ROI. So how do you find those pockets? And so we'll show some tools, some techniques to isolate those. We've looked at our past 50 organizations we've supported. We've looked at and we've captured about 11,000 pain points that we've aggregated, and we're going to show today to show some trends about what organizations are struggling with, some of which you might see in your own organization. But looking at and listening to organizations and finding out what hurts is one piece of it. Bottom up, top down, there's some strategies, some techniques, some technologies that can help us migrate those and find where those pockets or those levers are, using some more advanced technologies and analysis. So again, we've looked at about the previous 11,000 pain points that we've captured from a number of organizations, and we've looked at some trends. And we've got about 5 areas we want to zoom in on: indirect procurement, supply chain, the back office or shared services, organizational design, and broader enterprise effectiveness, PMO, BPI, et cetera, that we want to talk about and show some specific examples. And then finally, talking about the importance of great business cases and how that's supporting organizations, and us still seeing challenges with that level of maturity in a lot of organizations, as well as the magnitude of parallel enterprise initiatives that are going on, likely in your organization, that may be not connected or may be duplicative. So we'll talk a bit about these pieces and move right into it today. So in terms of what we're seeing, I don't have to go through a lot of this. You're probably seeing it in your organizations already, but whether it's certain commodities, part shortages, consumer pricing, consumer confidence, US benchmark interest rates around mortgage loans, et cetera, the cost of debt, especially for those organizations that are private equity owned or have some type of ownership from VC or what have you, the cost to service debt certainly is increasing. There's this tender balance between your covenants, how much assets you can have, asset turnover, what you've got in inventory right now versus what you're able to bring in from out of stock on the retail side, and the bullwhip effect of some of the COVID latent implications. And so when you couple that with just broad wage increases across the board, you've got lots of supply chain and transport issues still around costs. Some adjacent technologies that are beginning but maybe aren't quite paying dividends yet, or have strong return on investment at this point, and just global socioeconomic issues, e-commerce increases, reduction in physical footprint on things, and all the labor challenges. I mean, we've got a pretty complex scenario right now where organizations are feeling the burden around cost management. And so, how do we get better and faster at isolating where those are at in organizations and then taking them out systematically? Those that are doing a great job, that can do it quickly, have the advantage right now. And so we'll share what that looks like and what some of those trends are within organizations. So in terms of what we're going after, I know you're not designed to look at every individual bullet here, and Scott's referenced this many times, but the shareholder value or enterprise value map that Deloitte put together around what levers we've got in organizations is here. And so whether it's revenue growth, driving profitability, getting our assets to turn over more quickly, or managing client or shareholder expectations, there are hundreds of levers below those that we can pull and draw upon that mean different things. And that's the point. That's what we've got to get really good at. Now, how do we actually, make that real? Well, starting point's just getting an enterprise process map and learning to see waste and learning, this is sort of level 3 business processes at a higher level right before that swim lane, more detailed level. And if you imagine those 11,000 pain points or so that we've seen within organizations, if you were to draw a heat map of where they occur in a lot of organizations, the average organization, this is what some of that looks like. So if you think about our ability to dive into whether it's accounts payable and accounts receivable or fixed month-end close and get that from 5 days to 2 days, there's all these levers that we can pull to impact some of these, whether it's profitability, whether it's, price recovery on margin or what have you. Getting a sense of the pockets of non-value added time in organizations that have levers to impact the P&L or balance sheet is what this is all about, and getting faster at being able to isolate where those are in discovery. Now, in terms of the problem-solving approach that we take, we start with initiation, and a lot of organizations do this already, even your internal continuous improvement organizations. We would move into implementation, start to sequence and launch these and actually take that cost or time out of the organization, and then transition into training and start to realize those benefits and then track those benefits. But this is our standard problem-solving approach. But where we want to focus today is really around establishing current state faster and more efficiently. So the methods to do that is we would have an enterprise process map of the population of the organization's processes focused on the interdepartmental handoffs. There's traditionally a lot of waste in those areas. We would isolate and talk to people and listen to people and go to where the work is happening, do our Gemba walks, and take those pain points and overlay those and categorize those onto where that's happening in the enterprise process map. That's sort of the bottom-up analysis. Listen, do Gemba, go and see. However, top-down, this is where a lot of techniques and technologies are happening to get better at this. Where are the pockets of opportunity? How can we look into the general ledger and isolate, as a percentage of revenue, some benchmarks and say, look, indirect procurement might be 5.6% higher than a traditional company would be of our size. So what are those levers to pull? So this is where top-down, bottom-up analysis occurs, right in that midpoint to isolate areas of remedy for us. And so that's our focus of today. So in terms of looking at the past and the bottom-up analysis, we've looked at the previous 50 organizations we've supported. It covers about 20 different sectors. And this is the spread of pain points of where those 11,000 pain points come. Some pain points are, I don't have proper training or SOPs to do my job. Some of it's, we have 50 different technologies that aren't linking up. This is where and how those are stratified by department or by industry type for people, process, technology, and strategy. So when you look at, let's say, the government sector right now, obviously the technology is a much significantly larger percentage of pain points because of some of the integration and legacy ERP systems they have and so forth. So we've been able to go back and just do a little bit of a retrospective of what we're seeing across 20 different industries and thousands of, what hurts in organizations to share that with you today. I'll just zoom in a little bit on what that means. This is the stratification or affinity groups of what the top 80% look like one level deeper. And so I think we were surprised a little bit to see on the people and process side, roles and responsibilities, capacity, people issues, and then lack of standardization to account for roughly 30% of some of the origination of where that pain is. Versus maybe some of the technology or some of the other elements. But this just gives you an overview of what a lot of organizations are feeling when you actually create master data based on that and the dispersion accordingly. So as we look at maybe some of the top 5 interventions that we're finding, levers to control and cut costs or find waste, some of that's connected to listening to what the organizations are actually feeling. So if we start to dive in a little bit more, this is actually an interesting visual of how these 4 people, process, strategy, technology, how they map to some of the level 2 affinity groups here. And I thought this was an interesting portrayal. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but just what organizations are feeling, at least at a high level. When we move in one level deeper in terms of technology trends, you can actually see, these are some real quotes, some real things that people are feeling. Many of you may feel these, whether it's disparate systems. So we got really good at finding systems that do certain things, but we've bought 30 of them and now they're not connected. And we've got 14 data warehouses and I'm still in Excel, trying to make sense of this. When we move into data visibility and integration, we still have very limited visibility organizationally to the markers or performance of our products, or instead of looking forwards, we're looking backwards retrospectively at lagging indicators versus leading indicators. We don't have great bill of materials. So we've still got some of those basic things here that we're seeing. When it comes to process, especially in the service back office, we've got still a lot of email communication, thresholds for invoicing and approvals, how do you train, et cetera. This gives you a flavor of what people are experiencing, at least now that we've got about 11,000 of these in our sample size. And then moving into the people side, especially right now, seeing a lot of challenges keeping and retaining people from a talent management perspective. How do we find and how do we keep great people? So again, this is, as you're supporting your organizations, obviously we can look at a P&L and dive into it and use technologies to find out, hey, looks like financial shared services might have some gaps here. There's probably $300,000 here. But mapping the process, talking to people, doing job shadowing and listening and hearing what people are saying is equally important. Doing our Gemba walks across the organization is equally important to pair these things up.
Hey, Jared, I got a quick question for you.
Yeah.
So I just want to probe a little bit on the term pain points. So a pain point, so your use of that term, a pain point could be an example of a pain point could be a failure mode, where or how a process breaks down. Could be a bottleneck, a choke point in a process. Generally speaking, it's a critical spot in the flow of value that's not performing at the level we need it to perform at. Is that a fair statement?
That's exactly right. That's exactly the operational definition of that.
Yeah.
And you'll have variants of, some people hear a pain point might be just, I can't find people. It's just hard to find people. Some people might say, we've found people, but they don't have the right skills.
Yeah.
Some people might say that we can find people, but that process takes 6 weeks and we need it to be 3 weeks. So you get, so that's 3 different failure margins, 3 different parts in the process, but the same sort of flair.
And
so
and pain point's a good term because people actually do experience the pain. They experience frustration, and so there's pain felt at the spot where things are breaking down, but there's pain felt downstream.
Exactly.
Right. And so ultimately there's pain felt at the customer in the, in-store interactions or the, in the store operations and so forth. So I just wanted to highlight that because I like the use of the word pain points because I think it emphasizes that, people feel pain, they feel frustration. And so there's a human impact, a people impact, but there's also an organizational performance impact and a customer impact, right?
100%. Well, I think that's a good point. I want to go back just a little bit here and go back to give some context to this portrayal, because when you look at this heat map, again, going back to let's map the process, let's listen, let's establish failure modes or pain points. This is actually, if you group those 11,000 things based on severity, and if you look at the root cause of where that's occurring, this is a heat map overlaying the pain on our processes. And this is something that we don't often do. We make swim lane diagrams of what things look like, and sometimes we make interventions and we circle a pocket of that, or we delete that and say, okay, we can automate this, or this is a bad handoff. But to what degree does that address some of the organizational pain that actually occurred? Do we understand where that's occurring systematically? That's why I want to bring it back to this, is because this is a more systematic approach, because oftentimes, what's going to happen is there's going to be, integrated master plans, project schedules, Gantt charts to remedy these. There's going to be projects that come out of this as a portfolio of things we want to go do. And we often forget to go back and say, this is the percentage of pain that the organization is actually now not feeling. This is what we're solving as a result. So I want to bring that back a bit.
Yeah, and back to that slide real quickly, Jared. So the red, green, yellow, if people are, some people might be into process maturity level stuff. So essentially a red would be the process doesn't exist, or it's really, really broken. So it's ad hoc. Yellow or orange would be low process maturity, a process maturity level that's lower than we need it to be. And then green would be the process maturity level is a 3, 4, 5, right?
That's exactly right. If you look at whether it's Bloom's taxonomy of mature, or CPPM or what have you, there's different levels. But one thing you'll notice here is that this upper left-hand quadrant tends to be chronologically the starting point. So you'll notice that when you look at the dispersion of red here, they tend to be upstream chronologically, which I think you tend to find. So a lot of the pain is felt downstream, but when you look at the origination or the root cause of it, you'll notice it tends to be upstream.
And this is a subtlety, but red on the left is a bad thing, because this is the flow of value in the enterprise. So when you got red on the left, it means you got red downstream, right?
That's exactly right. Now, in this portrayal, the top here is core operational processes. The bottom are shared services that have no chronological time series impact. They tend to branch upwards and support operations at various moments. So the red and orange are sort of spread or dispersed evenly, depending. So, the green process here is like, our talent management and onboarding process for this particular organization was really humming, really working well. But their ability to do training, might be a challenge. So I think it's interesting to show shared services in an enterprise view in context of operations when we look at where the pain is felt.
Yeah, that's a neat, I like that. That's really a neat visualization. Yeah, thanks.
So again, going back to sort of this enterprise value stream map view, is looking at, how do we plan for our products? How do we buy them? How do we, move them through and sell these products? It's important to overlay where we're feeling this in the context, not only of where it's felt, but where it's originating from a root cause perspective. So I think that's the bottom up approach, which is, get out of the P&L, get out of the, the balance sheet, and listen to people and go do your demo walk, see where things and get some direct quotes and find out in affinity group what you're hearing. Now the parallel to that and juxtaposed to that, I think we also need to get better at top-down analysis with some of the tools that we have. And again, we're not reselling tools, or when you see some of the logos on here, we're technology agnostic, but here's some things that we're seeing that are helping make this easier. When you look at pockets of data within your organizations, you're going to have your ERP, your data lakes, you're going to have the financial GL or financial reports, management reports, documents. In the plant floor, you're going to have sensors, control, SCADA systems. You're going to have all sorts of data from your call centers or outsourced providers, what have you. So there's going to be data from everywhere that may or may not be challenging to get. Typically, it is challenging. What we're seeing now is there's some tools, Chat GPT and AI-based tools. There's an API. IBIS World is one of many research platforms, CapIQ, which is connected to S&P. Microsoft Copilot. There's some systems and interactions that are making our life a little bit easier to assess and find those pockets of opportunity. So, indirect procurement might be a pocket where bottom up, you hear there's a lot of pain, but it also could not be. So again, people sometimes may not be able to detect the magnitude of the opportunity from, their feeling, their gut feel, their experience. The process could be humming, it could be a great process, but you could still have significant opportunity in that area. Indirect procurement's a great, so you could have a great process, but still have significant opportunity in the marketplace if you haven't consolidated. If you've got 46 providers, that you buy toilet paper from, you might be able to get a volume discount if you go with one. So the process by which you do that might be flowing well, but you might have an issue. How do you detect that? How do you know that procurement's an issue? How do you know that your month-end close process should be 2.5 days instead of 7 days? How do you know that your distribution center cost as a percentage of revenue should be 1.7% instead of 3.5%? How do you know these things? Well, there's some great tools right now on the cheap. We're not talking 6 figures these days. We're talking 5 figures where, IBIS World has an amazing, again, we don't resell these. There's a ton of other platforms like this where through their API, through some Python, through some basic, database management, okay, distribution center costs in the pet food industry or in the chemical manufacturing industry ought to be 2.2% of revenue. From a Cap IQ perspective here, we know that the debt to equity ratio for your organization should be this, or the revenue per employee, or the number of employees per square foot. I mean, there are thousands of data points available. ChatGPT, asking it, what are traditional opportunity areas within indirect procurement for facilities spend? All of a sudden, we find out it's between 5% and 7%. So go ahead, Scott.
No, I want to highlight the points you just made, because, we talk about, being more systematic and reducing cost and waste. But the point that you're making is that you can benchmark key result areas and key performance indicators, and you can understand what are the right spec limits. So if you understand the spec limits, for example, for DC cost is relationship to total sales, and you understand in your industry, these are the bounds, these are the guardrails for costs. You could be too low, I guess you could be too low, you could be too high, right? So then that, knowing that, tells you that is a key result area, a key performance indicator that you need to go after. So then you have to figure out, what is it about the way we're managing our DCs that's causing our total cost to be higher than what they should be, right? So that's the logic.
100%. Maybe we're spending, if you look at your vendor ecosystem for carriers within transportation, maybe you're spending 3% of revenue on that, and best in class is spending 1.8%. Well, you've got 20 carriers, and so now to go in, it's again, how do you detect levers to go pull on? And so I think, traditionally, pricing and volume. So as a result of these things, what does this give you? Microsoft Copilot's got some nice beta tests now where you can ingest the financial GL and it can do some automatic analysis for you. There's some nice AI tools that they're coming out with, so that we don't have to sit and make pivot tables, make cubes and crank through these things. Again, how do we get faster at identifying where these are at? And this is an example where for an organization, we know that there's almost 4% price recovery we can take on the pricing side. We can get about 6% more in the volume. We can take 10% out of COGS. SG&A is about 8% overinflated. Asset turnover around inventory is 14%. Again, as a result of these things, this is the top-down analysis. We know, and you can get a picture of this pretty quickly, faster than we've ever been able to get for an organization, and pair that up with what we're seeing on the plant floor, what we're seeing bottom up from the process map view. So now we've got a sense, okay, let's go attack COGS a bit. Let's go, move our inventory turns, from 4 down to, or from 4 up to 6 or what have you. And that's going to help us on asset turnover, et cetera. Projects around leveraging fixed capital is huge. Got a lot of parallel initiatives and organizations. How do we make sure that they're not duplicative, and we're addressing ROI, et cetera? So I think this is sort of that top-down view that we want to pair up. And again, I think as we recap, and I'll just breeze through this, a lot of organizations are around cost of debt, especially private equity owned, are, that balance of covering off and hitting our covenants, with making sure we have the right amount of inventory, but not too much. From an affordability perspective, with given part shortages, we have a ton of pressure on that balance, especially on cost. The faster we're able to find these levers and pull on them and create a picture, because we've got, one of your max leverage points is your time, your team's time, and where do we push on things to go attack these? Well, there's ways to know, there's ways to strategically do that a bit better. Where do you look? Well, any pocket of activity, lots, whether it's reporting, shared services, back office, roles overlap, corporate projects, indirect procurement, supply chain and transportation. There's a lot of levers there when you look at activity, lots of things that are happening, but maybe not connected to the balance sheet of the P&L. Doing that bottom up and top down, we're finding is mandatory and needed. And there's some simple tools, some cheap tools that can get you there faster, on top of tools maybe you already have access to. So that's kind of where we're at. I want to zoom in a little bit and just say, okay, sounds great, but how do you do some of these things in real life? And so, let's say we zoom in on indirect procurement, and we're at 4.2% of revenue. Benchmark says it should be 2.5%. How do we make an intervention? What are some tools, techniques to do that? So, this is an example of, finding addressable spend for travel and entertainment, T&E, right? Office, rent, utilities, HR, professional services, consulting, market services, IT, telecom, et cetera. I mean, there are organizations, Logic Source does a great job. There's a number of other organizations that can provide this, or, ChatGPT, there's ways and mechanisms to find out how much should we be spending on telecom? What do our competitors spend on telecom? What if we leveraged 3 organizations to instead of 12? Are we going to get a volume discount there? Are we really good at doing RFPs with vendors? Do we know how, our vendor SLAs are doing currently? Do we have a vendor scorecard? There's all these questions. So typically, whether it's facilities, MRO, we know we can save 7% right off the top typically. And so there are organizations, if you don't have this maturity internally, or you don't have centralized procurement, or maybe you've got different buying teams, there's tons of ripe for opportunity to get. So again, this is an example of a lever as we look at common organizational issues to drive cost out. This is one of those: vendor practices and advancing your procurement maturity, right? Another one, we talked about this quite a bit in the supply chain webinar, so review that. I think that's in the database that Scott provided earlier. But small package, air, LTL, and freight. Are we spending too much? Are we, we have 20 courier services to get our stuff to the facilities. Why do we need 20? Can we get a volume discount if we're doing 4? Why are we, so I think there's lots of opportunity here, and there are tools, whether it's going through and scraping invoices one by one from the carriers to find mistakes. Are we overpaying for things? We've done projects with organizations where there's $7,000, $12,000, $15,000 overages or overcharged because nobody looked at your invoices of what you're paying versus the bill of lading or the manifest. So there's opportunities within transportation to look at your ecosystem of 3PL, 4PL companies, your internal fleet, et cetera. Typically are finding between 7 and 8% minimum for organizations. Being able to look at your broader supply chain ecosystem rapidly with some tools and some both discrete and stochastic simulations now, these aren't massively expensive. You can do these with some tools on the cheap these days. Do we need a new distribution center, or do we need to leverage a different 3PL to get product out west, et cetera? So I think these are some just simple levers in the supply chain and transportation space that we're seeing. We've done a lot of this on the BPM 4.0 webinar. You can go back to that, but in the back office, Power Automate, there's lots of other platforms that can do this. But looking after in green here, so if you go back to the process view here in green, we're looking at processes that are great automation candidates. Yellow are maybe, and the ones that aren't flagged are processes we don't believe we can automate. There's some really easy, simple things we can do to take time out, especially in the back office or shared services where the process, it's hard to go see it or do the Gemba. Sometimes it's the process is an email string that goes from 7 different people and then a meeting. Those are really ripe for opportunity. And when you start to add up those over time, especially dealing with messy PDFs and if you're not on EDI or you've got lots of manual documents, those are pockets that are ripe for this to automate. So again, lots of opportunity to streamline in the back office, shared services, leveraging RPA or AI tools. One of the other pieces, going back to listening to the organization, is role clarity, overlap of responsibilities, people doing duplicative work, people not doing work that's not connected to either their skill set or what the organization needs. The R matrix for us, which is a hybrid RACI methodology that we use. A lot of organizations do org design and they start with, a fixed org structure. And they say, this is what we're going to do. This is what makes sense. This is, what the strategy consultants told us to do or what have you. And they start top down instead of going bottom up and looking at what are the optimal business processes that need to exist to serve our client at the highest level and make a bit of money. Working bottom up from the process, which then architects level 3, 4, 5 SOP level process steps, and understanding who does what in the context of your optimal processes ought to be the starting place. So when you look at, who's responsible for the work, who's doing the work, who's consulting, when you look at traditional R matrix or RACI design, when we start there, instead of starting with an org design and working backwards and just modifying the org so that we can make it work for these people and executives we have at the top, starting bottom up with, here's what the process ought to look like to get to our customers as fast as possible. Here are the roles that ought to happen, and getting rid of, we see 23% duplication typically in organizations when we do these, of handoffs, people doing things that ought not to be doing those, or having 12 people in a meeting that needs to be 3, or having a meeting when it can be an email, or those simple things. They actually do add up quite a bit. When organizations are doing org design bottom up, we're seeing 17% more efficiency on time savings through the organization through starting bottom up versus top down. So again, these are just levers that we can pull, that we can look at based on what you're seeing in your organization. And the top down, we could have said, okay, revenue per employee is 426,000 for our competitors. We're at 297,000. We've got a lot more people than we do revenue from our competitive set. How are we going to level set the organization? This is one mechanism to have a look at. Again, so this goes back and connects the top down and bottom up strategies that we've talked about. And then finally, there are a lot of pockets. We looked at an organization that was 150 people, and they had almost 100 parallel corporate initiatives going on. That's almost one corporate initiative per person in the organization. We've looked at others that have thousands of corporate initiatives. So when you look at fixed capital and our ability to utilize that to create a return, to do great business cases, just to get back to building a charter and making sure, all these pockets of activity and corporate initiatives, as we spin those up, we're seeing enormous duplication and overlap of these. This is another pocket to make sure you're looking at within your organization. Are we utilizing our people? Even our PMOs and continuous improvement teams are. Oftentimes, when you haven't centralized these, you see pockets of initiatives that are disconnected from strategy and that have significant overlap. So, doing stop, start, continue, sort of a ongoing process is quite critical. So I just wanted to share that. We've seen organizations that have the perception that maybe there's 12 corporate programs in flight, and there's hundreds. Pockets of these are quite important and is a pretty big lever for us to look at. I know this isn't sort of plant floor level, but these are where a lot of corporate level initiatives and pockets of opportunity do lie still. So again, this is just an example of getting great at business cases, and I know we'll wrap up and do some questions here, Scott. But we still see organizations that don't take it down a level. This is just an example of us wanting to do a hack process project for an organization. And this was the first time the organization had ever seen anything like this, where we do some analysis, we look at how much time we're actually spending there. We do some time and motion studies. We realize we need to re-engineer the pack process. We build a quick overview of that. We do a benefit to burden score, which is a combination of the financial benefit, but takes into account change management. We look at how difficult it is to do. We know that this is going to address 7% of those initial pain points. We know how long it's going to take, and we've got what the P&L or balance sheet impact's going to be for a business case. And here's how we're going to do it. And then we build a detailed charter. So, we just see a lot of organizations still skip this step and take on, in their portfolio, way too many initiatives they haven't quite scoped out correctly. They haven't quite dove in and to one level deeper on how is this actually going to impact, this GL code on the P&L to improve profitability, et cetera. So again, the organizations that are great at connecting the projects they're doing, make sure that they're not duplicative and that they're actually doing great business cases, and then following up on how they actually did on it. Again, simple maturities tend to be winning right now when it comes to fixed capital and return on capital. So I know I've thrown a lot at you. I think it's probably time, Scott, just to talk through and do some Q&A and maybe break some of these components down more simply. But these are some of the key points of that second piece. But again, we've looked through the past 11,000 pain points of what organizations are struggling with, and we found 5 areas. There's a ton more. Indirect procurement, 5 to 15% minimum. Benchmarking your supply chain transport, we're seeing 7% minimum. Typically at the macro supply chain level, 20% plus when you look at distribution center placement and how we're getting things and micro fulfillment and some of those concepts, drop ship and backhaul. RPA and AI, greater than 20%, sometimes half, if not more. Org design, 17% on average, and then corporate initiatives. In some cases, we've worked with organizations where we've taken out literally half of their corporate initiatives because they weren't contributed to the strategy of the organization, or they were quite duplicative, or they weren't addressing the right levers that the organization needed. And then finally, getting great at business cases and getting great at architecting and delivering our strategies and deploying them is quite critical. So hope this gave you just some levers and things we're seeing. Maybe you could find it applicable to your organization. So I'll pause there, Scott. Maybe it was a lot for the audience, but let's take some questions and let's hash through some of these.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. That's good. Yeah, it was a lot, and so I think I like the fact that you told us what you were going to tell us. You identified, you went through your 6 key points at the front end, and then at the back end, you sort of told us what you told us, and you sort of summarized and embellished it a little bit. So I think that's useful for people, and those that are interested can go back and look through the presentation and study the bookend that you did. This is what I'm going to tell you, and then the enhanced summary of what you said. So I think that what I heard you say was that the sort of the Bible on value stream mapping was done by James Womack, the guy that wrote the Lean, sort of the first Lean book, and it's called Learning to See. And so one of the things, if I simplify what you said, one of the important things is you're using swim lane flow maps, Visio, layered Visio, as a way of mapping out the flow of value in an enterprise or a sub component of the enterprise. So, and then what you're doing once you've got a picture of how value flows, then you're layering on top of that, where are there breakdowns? Where are the failure modes happening? So I heard that come loud and clear. And I also heard you say that all waste and cost aren't equal. In other words, some are more important than others. And I'm not sure that people are very systematic in their way of thinking about what waste and cost do I tackle first. Hmm. And I think you're offering up a way to be more systematic in deciding what you tackle. And the last point you made was really important, because I think so many organizations end up boiling the ocean, which was, they got too many projects, and they don't have a project management office. They don't have a program management office. They really don't do change management very good. And so they end up with being overwhelmed with this plethora of things that and they don't get anything done. They don't get the right things done. That's sort of a takeaway for me. Am I hearing it right?
100%. Sometimes systematically it's as a result of not having an organizational strategy. So, so how do we know what's important? We see organizations, 20% of organizations actually have a strategy and they're acting on it. That's a really low, that's 1 in 5 organizations. Part of that strategy ought to be related to how are we positioned in the marketplace? And positioning is, going back to that sort of lever chart on, we're positioned well in the marketplace. We've got a lot of customers on the price side. We're okay, but we're 30% less profitable than our competitors are. Do you have a sense? And so thus, how does that drive? Okay, so we need to look at COGS. We need to look at our product costs. So we, a lot of times bottom up, whether it's BPI groups, operations, you start to see, an executive or somebody says, all right, let's go fix supply chain, or let's look at procure to pay, or let's look at these activities that seems like there's opportunity there, but nobody's done the analysis to say, hey, procurement as a percentage of revenue is 30% more expensive in our organizations than it is for our competitor set. Or even, not necessarily benchmarking, but internal benchmarking. 6 years ago, our supply chain costs were 3% of revenue. Now they're 6% of revenue. So we know that we were capable of delivering at this cost structure. So being able to zoom out and have a look at departmentally where the organization is at to then drive a portfolio of projects that are connected to that strategy. It's just we have different leaders and different agendas and different groups, and we've inherited some projects that we don't know where they came from, and we sort of stop and forget to ask the question, why are we doing this? How is this connected to driving waste out of the organization and attacking? There's a lot of levers in organizations. When you remember that Deloitte Enterprise Value Map, there was hundreds of levers there. So you can pull levers, but a very few, it's Pareto, right? A very few amount of them are going to draw the most significant savings for us.
Yeah, I want to highlight a couple of points you just made. So my good friend Sean Lee, who was a great student of mine at Ohio State, asked a question, and I'm glad that Sean, you're doing well and you're online. So Jared, I think when you engage with people, there's a strategy component. So there's a shared vision. So usually, if there isn't a shared vision, we would work to help an organization create a shared vision. And then there's a migration. So there's a shared vision where there's alignment around where we want to be 3 to 5 years, let's say. And then there's a current state assessment. And then you, Jared, help highlight gaps, differences. Do you see the differences between where you want to be, where you need to be, and where you are? And then you made a comment just a minute ago, you create this migration strategy and migration plan. Some of those projects end up being DMAIC projects. Some of them end up being re-engineering projects. Some of them end up being a Kaizen blitz. So the approach that you take to the portfolio of projects varies depending upon the animal that you're tackling. Is that fair?
100%, and it must. If you're an agile organization and you throw agile at everything, not great. The attributes and the characteristics of your culture, the magnitude of change that they can absorb, the capacity of your teams, the attributes of the project itself, where the pain's coming from. Is this a new process that we need? Are we fixing an existing process? All of these variables dictate different problem-solving methods. So if you think about the lead time, so we talk about the lead time of our processes and waste in association with our processes. What about the lead time of what we do? What about the lead time of problem solving? Think about how do we reduce cycle times? Well, one is, if you throw a standard tool set at everything, your lead time is probably going to be 3-4x longer versus the right tool set, the right skill set at the right moment in time for the right project to deliver the appropriate amount of value.
Yeah, and I think, I'm a member of the Council on Industrial and Systems Engineers, and we've got Boeing and UPS and John Deere and GM and, a lot of the big guys. And then, most of them do this in one form or fashion. But a lot of the organizations that you work with, Jared, I know, are more small and medium-sized enterprises. And so, they don't have an industrial engineering department. They don't have a business process improvement initiative or a program management office. So I know that this probably seems really complex and beyond people if you're somebody that's an SME, but I guess you work every day to dummy it down for people, right?
Yeah, and I don't know that it's dumbing it down as much as some of the language does feel complex, but some of it's just budgetary. An organization that, and again, 75% of the organizations we support are in the mid-market or smaller. So we do support lots of huge organizations, but you're right, there are a couple 100-person organizations that don't have a 10-person continuous improvement department. The department is the ops manager who maybe is a green belt and leads Six Sigma, or the department is an individual. And so that's why I think leveraging some of these tools, so ChatGPT is free, and again, there's tons of others. Some of these benchmarking tools that you can have access to, again, they're not 6 figures, there's 5 figures or 4 figures. So from a feasibility perspective, Copilot will be fairly reasonable, but I believe some of the APIs to, so even if you go to Yahoo, if you're a publicly traded organization, you've got access to your quarterly filings, SEC level reports, and Yahoo Finance is free. So if you get creative on some of this stuff, the magnitude of insights you can create, I think you'd be astounded. Go into ChatGPT and just ask it, how much can I save in facilities and MRO within indirect procurement? What do other companies typically save? And that's why I put ChatGPT up there, is that, and again, you got to be careful with the results, and you got to look at where this is coming from. But there are some simple tools that are very accessible for organizations these days. You might not have a huge ERP system or have huge systems. Just go Google it. Go find a YouTube video on how to leverage some of these tools. I think you'd be surprised as to what you can find.
Well, Jared, I appreciate you sharing this with us. I think this is a perfect example of the new industrial engineering. It's a great example of an innovative way to focus on the integration of people, strategy, process, and technology, and to more systematically tackle waste and cost, which is ever so critical for us in the roaring, what I call the roaring 20s, right? So, let me just close up real quickly. Once again, Jared, thanks for taking time. I know you're really, really busy, and I appreciate you doing this with us today. So what's just ahead? April 18th, next Tuesday, we're going to have a sneak preview, overview of the Council on Industrial and Systems Engineering Performance Excellence track, which will be held in at the IISE conference in New Orleans. I'm going to be there. My first IISE conference was in New Orleans in 1973. That dates me. And so I'm looking forward to getting back to Bourbon Street and having a hurricane or two. So if you want to register for that, CISE Performance Excellence Sneak Preview, that's next week, and that link is right there in this presentation. On June 5th, I threw this in. John White is a great friend of mine, a past president of IISE, a chancellor emeritus from the University of Arkansas. He's just written a book called Why It Matters, Reflections on Practical Leadership. And so I've got the registration link for John's presentation, which will be in early June. And then what's ahead is we're shifting focus to more focused on operational analytics, data analytics, operational analytics. And we got some great webinars set up for you in May and June on that. So I want to put in a plug for the IISE conference. If you don't know about it, if you're not aware of it, go to the IISE website, click on conferences, annual conference, and you'll get plenty of information there. It's a wonderful opportunity to network and be with people like-minded. CISE puts together a track which will be run on Sunday, Carrie Alderman, who is the VP of Industrial Engineering with UPS, and Thomas Davis, who's the Director of Performance Services at Duke, will join me next Tuesday. And we're going to give you an executive overview of what's going to happen in the work sessions that we're going to do on Sunday. This is just a high level picture of what happens on Sunday. So we have a service systems engineering innovations final four presentations will happen right out of the starting gate. And then our keynote presenter is from Intel, Rich Echeverria, VP and GM of Security Sales. So great keynote, three great keynote presentations. And then the three workshops, 80-minute workshops. One will be in healthcare and life sciences, the next one in re-engineering supply chains with ISE innovations, and then the last one, organizational operational excellence and analytics best practices. It's like, you know, you could, I don't know that you could you could go anywhere else and get this opportunity. CISE is a group of senior leaders that literally run the industrial engineering function for their organizations, and you'll get an opportunity to meet them, network with them, ask them questions, and learn from them. And then Sunday night from 5 to 6:20, one of my favorite things is we have an annual IISE student capstone senior design contest. It's sort of like the basketball March Madness in a sense. So we have the 16 of the best projects from all over the country, North America, come in, and then there's like a bake-off. There's the Sweet 16 goes to the Elite 8, and then the Final Four, and then on Monday morning the Final Four do presentations. So it's really, really fun. And so that's a mixer and capstone showcase, poster showcase. So I'd encourage you all to consider joining us in New Orleans. I'll be there, and I'd really welcome an opportunity to get to know you in person. So that's it for today. There is a survey. If you'll take time to fill that out and give us feedback and tell us how we did, Jared and I will appreciate that. And I'll just close by once again saying thanks, Jared, for doing this. It was a great presentation. Super job.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
So stay safe, stay healthy, and see you next time. Thank you.